The biker bar known as Raven's Hollow sat on the outskirts of a small, dusty town, its neon sign flickering half-heartedly in the thick night air. Above the low hum of a faulty outside lamp, the rumble of motorcycles drifted through the darkness like a foreboding heartbeat. Inside that seedy establishment, a gauntlet of hardened men and women found their nightly refuge among stale beer fumes and the acrid scent of burning cigarettes. Yet even in this den of bravado and scorn, the night's mood shifted dangerously when Dwayne Johnson pushed open the battered door, stepping in as though drawn by fate. He was a massive figure, tall, powerfully built, his shoulders and arms unconsciously conveying the might of a man who'd trained for years, who'd tested his strength countless times in different corners of the world. The battered leather jacket he wore had seen better days, but it did nothing to hide the formidable expanse of his torso. His entrance caused an immediate stir among the patrons, all conversation dipping to uneasy whispers as Dwayne's boots thudded against scuffed floorboards. At the heart of Raven's Hollow, the Crimson Fangs biker gang held court. They wore identical leather vests emblazoned with a crimson skull motif, each member trying to look more menacing than the next. Their leader, Clayton Briggs, a tall, lean, gray-bearded giant, glowered at Dwayne from across the smoky bar. Around Clayton sat his closest allies. Travis, a wiry man with sleeveless denim revealing bony arms, and two others, Bruno and Mace, whose thick, tattooed forearms revealed years of brutal living. The faint light above their table cast them in half-shadows, intensifying their grim aura. Leaning behind the scratched bar top was Linda, the longtime bartender at Raven's Hollow. She was middle-aged, lines of worry and experience etched around her eyes. Over the years, Linda had seen countless brawls erupt over simple misunderstandings or drunken slurs, and she instantly sensed that tonight's newcomer would tip the precarious balance in the Crimson Fang's lair. She observed Dwayne Johnson's entry with both dread and curiosity, her gaze flicking from him to Clayton's scowl. Dwayne's eyes swept the room, taking in the tattered posters, mismatched chairs, and soiled tabletop surfaces, each a silent testament to the bar's grim lineage. He approached Linda, offering a curt nod, then uttered a simple order. "Whiskey, neat." The calm in his voice struck Linda as oddly reassuring, like a soldier requesting rations before an incoming battle. Clayton's tall frame rose from the battered booth, the chain dangling at his waist clinking ominously. The rest of the Crimson Fangs followed suit, chairs scraping the wood. Travis spat a wad of tobacco onto the floor, narrowing his eyes at the newcomer. The tension in the air was palpable, as though the entire bar recognized that a storm had just rolled in, a storm wearing Dwayne Johnson's unflappable composure. "Boy, you lost?" Clayton's raspy voice broke the silence, his eyebrows arched in mocking surprise. Behind him, the other bikers snickered, Travis and Bruno exchanging eager grins. Dwayne paid their hostility little mind. He merely angled his head and turned halfway toward Linda, prepared to accept the drink she placed before him. The glass trembled slightly under Linda's own shaky grip. "No sign says I can't step inside," Dwayne replied, his tone calm, almost indifferent. He took the glass in hand and swirled the amber liquid. The response fired a shot of anger through Travis, who slammed his fist onto the nearest table. The dull thud echoed in the hush. Clayton's smirk turned sharper. "We don't get many visitors like you," he growled. Dwayne detected the venom behind those words. He recognized that half the bar's patrons watched with grim fascination, while the rest simply tried to pretend none of it was happening. A flicker of amusement passed across Dwayne's features, for intimidation was an old game to him, one he'd played with men far more dangerous than these. Slowly, Dwayne raised his glass to his lips, savoring a careful sip of whiskey. Then he set it down upon the bar, the quiet click enough to hush a few of the muffled conversations around them. "Not here for trouble," he stated, glancing from Linda to the Crimson Fangs. "But if you insist on making some, I won't leave you disappointed." The hush that followed was thick as tar. An uneasy ripple rolled through the tavern, like a wave passing among onlookers who clearly understood. They stood at the verge of an explosive confrontation. Clayton Briggs stepped around the table to face Dwayne Johnson directly. Despite the advantage of a half-dozen men behind him, Clayton still felt a jolt of unease at the sheer size and unshakable presence of this newcomer. He'd bullied many in his time, leering drifters and truckers who strayed onto the Crimson Fang's turf. But something about Dwayne was different. At Clayton's side, Travis cracked his knuckles. He was a man of gaunt stature, his grin reminiscent of a weasel, thin-lipped and full of malice. Travis exhaled the reek of stale beer and chewing tobacco as he tried to provoke a snicker from their gang. "Seems we got ourselves a tough guy," he drawled, leveling a hateful glare at Dwayne. The other gang members closed ranks, forming a half circle that penned Dwayne in against the bar. Linda, from her vantage behind the bar, placed a trembling hand on the phone hidden under the counter. She'd seen fights break out before, but the air around this one felt far more lethal. Typically, a single glare from the Crimson Fangs would chase any newcomer off. Now confronted with Dwayne's calm but unwavering stance, they appeared offended, and Linda knew how easily that offense could spark real bloodshed. The hush that followed Travis's remark was stifling, as though the bar itself held its breath. Dwayne simply turned his head, letting his gaze fall on each biker in turn. His voice dropped to a measured rumble. "Came for a drink, not a show. So how about we drop this?" It was a suggestion, not a plea, and the subtle challenge in his words made Travis's smirk deepen. Clayton's lip curled, baring teeth that had seen their share of scuffles. "We're not in the habit of showing hospitality to uninvited guests," he sneered. The bikers behind him shifted restlessly, fists clenching and jaws tightening. They bristled with an energy that Linda recognized all too well. If the tension escalated, it would take only a spark for the bar to become a battlefield. Dwayne's eyebrows lifted as if in mild surprise. "Didn't realize I needed an invitation," he said quietly, draining the last of his whiskey in a single swallow. He set the empty glass on the bar, the sound of it hitting wood unnervingly loud in the hush. Suddenly, Bruno, a giant hulk of a man, with shaved head and arms roped with veins, lunged forward, knuckles raised. He swung at Dwayne's face in a wide, brute-fueled arc. The strike was swift, but telegraphed, and Dwayne pivoted gracefully, letting the blow sail past him. With lightning reflexes, he caught Bruno's arm mid-swing, applying just enough pressure that the crack of bone resonated in the bar's silence. A sharp cry escaped Bruno's lips as he slumped, pinned by Dwayne's vice-like grip. Shouts erupted among the Crimson Fangs, tables and chairs screeching as they leapt to their feet, rage fueling them. Linda stifled a gasp, torn between terror and awe. With a calm that belied the chaos, Dwayne shoved Bruno aside, letting the big man collapse onto a nearby table, toppling drinks and sending shards of glass across the floor. Clayton's eyes flared wide, a spark of hate igniting into fury at the disrespect. "You're a dead man," he hissed. "The Crimson Fangs run this place, and you just signed your own funeral." Travis joined in, brandishing a battered pool cue, his grin revealing yellowed teeth that glistened with excitement. Dwayne responded with an air of near indifference, rolling his neck to loosen any tension, the muscles in his arms and chest tensing in readiness. "You'll regret that," he warned, voice low but unflinching. "But go ahead, show me." A moment of stunned hesitation flashed across the bikers' faces. Then Travis roared, pool cue raised as the others fanned out in a savage semicircle. A fuse had been lit. Linda yelped a warning, but it was drowned out by the crash of bar stools and the ring of metal. Dwayne braced himself, eyes sweeping the array of men, some holding chain links, others brandishing fists, every one of them consumed by anger. The final calm before the storm ended in an instant, as the bikers launched themselves at Dwayne with guttural battle cries. Travis charged first, his pool cue slicing through the smoky air, aimed directly at Dwayne Johnson's ribs. Dwayne pivoted with lightning precision, intercepting the cue with a forearm block that rattled the wood upon impact. Before Travis could yank it free, Dwayne's free hand snapped forward in a counterblow, cracking into Travis's jaw. The smaller man staggered backward, reeling from the force, but the fight had only begun. From Dwayne's left, Mace, a lanky biker with tattoos winding around his neck, lunged in, swinging a chain like a medieval flail. The links whirled dangerously, threatening to wrap around Dwayne's limbs if he miscalculated. Yet Dwayne ducked low, his powerful legs coiling, and erupted upward with a devastating uppercut that hammered into Mace's chin. The chain clattered to the floor as Mace crumpled, eyes rolling back. A fierce roar erupted from the onlookers, some cowering behind overturned tables, others cheering the sudden demonstration of raw might. Bruno, still nursing his wounded arm, mustered enough adrenaline to rush Dwayne from behind. He tried to slam a broken beer bottle against Dwayne's back, but Dwayne sensed the threat, spinning around in time to grip Bruno's wrist. With ruthless efficiency, he twisted until the bottle slipped from Bruno's grasp, shattering on the floor. Then, with a savage knee to Bruno's midsection, Dwayne sent him heaving for breath. All the while, the Crimson Fangs, who weren't actively engaged, formed a ring around them, yelling insults and spurring each other on. In the thick haze of tension, Clayton hovered, eyes dark with venom. He watched in growing anger as Dwayne dismantled his men with an uncanny mix of speed and power. "Get him!" Clayton barked, a tremor of shock leaking into his demand. He had never seen outsiders tear through his loyal bikers like this. Linda, pinned behind the bar, trembled. She'd half expected a swift scuffle or a short-lived brawl, maybe some battered faces. But she hadn't anticipated the unstoppable force that Dwayne seemed to embody. For so long, the Crimson Fangs had terrorized this region, bullying travelers and imposing their will without consequence. Tonight, they'd met a foe who gave them no ground. Two more bikers, Ryder and Pete, advanced in unison. Ryder flailed a crowbar, while Pete brandished a switchblade. They lunged at Dwayne from opposite sides, attempting to trap him in a pincer attack. Yet Dwayne's reflexes remained razor-sharp. He dodged the crowbar's slash, slamming the heel of his palm into Ryder's wrist. The weapon clanged to the floor. Pete aimed his switchblade at Dwayne's midsection, but with a lightning-quick parry, Dwayne seized Pete's arm and forced it upwards, twisting the blade from his grip. Cries of pain echoed as Dwayne delivered rapid strikes, each blow strategic, aimed to neutralize rather than to kill. The bar's atmosphere turned chaotic. Shattered glass underfoot, chairs upturned, half-finished drinks spilled into sticky puddles, and frantic cursing from a cluster of frightened bystanders. The entire scene glowed under the dull neon sign that flickered overhead, painting the carnage in surreal colors. Recovering from the shock of seeing so many of his men laid low, Clayton decided to reassert control. With a furious grunt, he shoved aside two of his fallen comrades and strode forward, pulling a large knife from his belt. His shoulders squared, jaw clenched, he locked eyes with Dwayne. "You might have some skill," he snarled, "but no one humiliates the Crimson Fangs and walks away breathing." Dwayne's chest rose and fell in deep, measured breaths. He studied Clayton's tall frame, the blade glinting in the half-light, and recognized the single-minded rage fueling this battered alpha of a broken gang. Tilting his head, Dwayne's lips curved in a slight, confident smile. "You're welcome to try," he said. "Let's see if you fare better than your men." A hush fell. Even Travis, Bruno, and the others who could still stand reeled in place, nursing bruises and cuts, too stunned to rush to Clayton's side. The confrontation narrowed to just these two men, a final showdown that the bar's petrified patrons collectively sensed would be explosive. Clayton lunged without warning, knife angled for a vicious thrust at Dwayne Johnson's abdomen, but Dwayne twisted aside, making Clayton slice only air. The bigger man's momentum carried him dangerously close to a shattered table, nearly sending him sprawling. Dwayne seized that chance, pivoting to catch Clayton's forearm before he could recover. His grip locked around the biker leader's wrist with punishing force. A savage grunt tore from Clayton as he felt the power in Dwayne's hold, the nearly inhuman squeeze on his joints. Face contorted in fury, Clayton tried to jerk free, but Dwayne's stance was immovable, like a mountain anchored to the bar floor. The bikers looked on, battered and bloodied, confusion and shock mixing in their expressions. Some clutched bruised limbs, others dabbed at split lips or swollen eyes, uncertain whether to dive back into the fray or flee. Dwayne could easily have broken Clayton's arm, but he chose instead to deliver a lesson in humiliation. With a quick pivot, he whipped Clayton around, forcing him to drop the knife. It clattered across the floor, spinning until it halted near Linda's trembling feet. "Guess that means you lost your bite," Dwayne said quietly, voice tinged with cold steel. Clayton hissed between clenched teeth. You, you don't get it. The Crimson Fangs have run this territory for years. One man like you can't. His words caught in his throat as Dwayne released him abruptly. Clayton staggered, nearly falling to his knees, only to glare back at his men, urging them forward with a defiant wave. Bruised though they were, the bikers rallied. Travis, sporting a badly swollen jaw, spat out a mouthful of blood and advanced with a battered pool cue he'd reclaimed. Bruno and Mace grimly lifted themselves from the wreckage, fists ready, though their wincing faces betrayed the damage done. A ragged sense of unity flared in the Crimson Fangs. Even in defeat, they refused to surrender their reputation. Yet as they hesitated, uncertain whether to swarm Dwayne again, a new presence materialized in the bar. Linda, the barkeep, emerged from behind the counter, leveling a shotgun that had evidently been stashed somewhere in easy reach. The clack of it racking a shell boomed like thunder in the tense hush. Her knuckles whitened around the wooden stock. "That's enough," Linda declared, her voice shaky but determined. She pointed the barrel at Travis first, then swept it across the group. In her eyes gleamed a raw anger that had long smoldered under the Crimson Fang's terrorizing regime. A hush settled, broken only by the biker's ragged breathing. Dwayne glanced at Linda, brow arching in mild surprise. He recognized that in stepping forward, Linda risked her life, but the alternative was letting the bar descend into savage lawlessness. Her own posture stiffened, and she forced a tremulous breath. "We're done with your intimidation," she said, flinging a fierce look at Clayton. "Get out, all of you, before this ends worse." An uneasy murmur spread among the few regular patrons who had cowered behind tables. Some peered over the rim of knocked-over furniture, eyes like saucers. The conflict had accelerated beyond just one man standing up to the bikers. Now it was the entire bar, or at least Linda, backing Dwayne's stance. Clayton's gaze flicked from Linda's shotgun to Dwayne, who still loomed like a living monument of defiance. With clenched fists, Clayton spat a wad of blood onto the floor. "This ain't over," he snarled, voice choking on frustration. "You'll regret crossing the Crimson Fangs." The implicit promise of vengeance hung in the air, thick as gunpowder, waiting for a spark. Dwayne stepped closer, his presence overshadowing Clayton once more. "Make sure you bring enough men next time," he rumbled, quiet enough that only Clayton and the nearest bikers heard. The rest of them hesitated, balanced on the cusp of unleashing a final desperate wave. Then Clayton, shoulders heaving, flicked a stiff hand in dismissal. The battered bikers limped out of Raven's Hollow, cursing under their breath as they gathered weapons and pried from the floor. When the last of the Crimson Fangs disappeared into the night, Linda swallowed, lowering her shotgun. She exhaled a trembling sigh, flicking a cautious look at Dwayne. The bar's tension lingered, like an echo of thunder after a storm, but Dwayne simply sighed, rolling one shoulder as if to ease residual strain from the brawl. As the battered bikers roared away on their motorcycles, the hum of engines dissipated into the silent dark, leaving Dwayne Johnson and the rattled patrons to survey the carnage inside Raven's Hollow. Fractured tables, upended chairs, scattered shards of broken bottles. The bar resembled a battlefield aftermath. A few regulars who'd cowered behind the bar or crouched in corners edged forward, drawn by curiosity. One man, sporting a thick mustache, whistled low at the devastation. Another, a woman wearing a trucker cap, offered Linda a shaky grin, as though to say, "I'm glad you whipped out that shotgun in time." The hush was uneasy, thick with the knowledge that violence had only paused, not ended. Clayton had made a promise of retribution, and the Crimson Fangs prided themselves on never letting an insult pass unpunished. Linda carefully set the shotgun aside, letting her heart rate settle. She risked a glance at Dwayne's broad back, half expecting him to be rummaging for another drink. Instead, he busied himself pulling chairs upright, returning them to a semblance of order. The gesture, so unexpectedly polite after the destruction, almost made Linda smile. For a man who just floored half a biker gang, Dwayne exuded a calm courtesy that baffled her. Wincing slightly, Dwayne rolled his neck, then touched a bruised spot on his left forearm. It would remind him of the blow he'd taken from Travis's pool cue. He was used to pain, Pain from training, from stunts, from countless scuffles over the years. But the throbbing ache served as a reminder that the night's conflict had gone deeper than a casual bar brawl. Linda watched him from behind the bar, her uneasy fear giving way to a flood of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, voice gravelly from nerves. "They've Those men have terrorized this place for months. It's never gone this far, but you put them in their place." She took a rag to the bar top, wiping away spilled whiskey and splatters of blood, her motion mechanical and distant. Dwayne paused in stacking up some overturned stools, glancing her way. His features eased into an understated nod. "Sometimes bullies just need a reality check," he replied, his voice resonant with a certain weariness. "But I doubt this is the last we'll see of them. They seem pretty determined." A hollow laugh escaped Linda's lips. "Yeah, the Crimson Fangs aren't known for letting grudges go." She licked her lips, momentarily flicking a glance at the half-conscious form of Travis, who had moaned and crawled out with the rest. "They left so easily this time, but only because they've got bigger plans for payback." Dwayne's mouth tightened. He'd read the same conclusion in the biker's parting glowers. "If they come back, I'll handle it," he said simply, a promise that Linda found oddly comforting. She surveyed the broad expanse of his back, marveling at the calm confidence that emanated from him. The bar's lights flickered, the battered neon sign outside still stuttering. One of the older patrons, a man with a cane, approached. "Sir, you sure about that? They might bring a real army next time." He seemed torn between admiration and worry, not wanting to see further bloodshed. Dwayne offered a shrug, leaning the last stool upright. "I'm sure," was all he said. The stoic power behind those words left the older man trembling with reluctant awe. Linda shot the older patron a half smile, recognizing that Dwayne's straightforward approach was precisely what the Crimson Fangs needed to respect, or at least fear. Linda exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Well, the next round's on the house," she announced to the bar, forcing a small grin. It was a meager gesture to lighten the tension, but the regulars reacted with relieved murmurs, a few offering toast to Dwayne's unstoppable force. Dwayne himself merely accepted a fresh glass of whiskey with a courteous nod. The rest of the night passed in subdued conversation, patrons finishing their drinks in hushed relief. Dwayne stationed himself near the bar's back corner, occasionally exchanging a few words with Linda, but mostly remaining silent, scanning the door each time it creaked. Everyone sensed that the quiet was temporary. The Crimson Fangs nursed injured pride, and if they'd retreated tonight, they would return in greater numbers, seeking to restore their tarnished reputation. Linda privately dreaded that confrontation, but a sliver of hope glimmered. She and her patrons had a champion now, a man who'd upended the gang's entire aura of invincibility. If the bikers came back for revenge, maybe they wouldn't face them alone. Maybe the entire town, stirred by an example of defiance, might be ready to join the cause. The mere possibility gave Linda the courage to keep on pouring drinks and clearing shattered debris, though a heavy undercurrent of worry tugged at her heart. Dawn arrived quiet and eerily calm, as if the world itself was gathering breath for another storm. Dwayne Johnson awoke on the edge of town, having spent the night in a small roadside motel with peeling paint and flickering lights. Sleep was fleeting, his mind replaying the bar brawl, the lines on Linda's worried face, the way the Crimson Fangs had departed with their teeth still bared in threat. He suspected that wrath like theirs wouldn't remain idle for long. He found himself craving fresh air, so after a quick rinse in the motel's outdated shower, he walked to the local diner, a squat, unassuming place with a sign that read, "Carla's Kitchen" in chipped paint. Inside, the decor was cozy, if worn, booths lined with ripped vinyl and a waitress who greeted him with a tight-lipped nod. He sipped black coffee and ate scrambled eggs, all the while noticing the sideways looks from other patrons. Word of the previous night's fight had traveled fast, and they likely recognized him as the man who battered half the Crimson Fangs in Raven's Hollow. When he stepped outside, the day felt oddly bright, the sun's warmth contrasting with the uneasy tension saturating the town. A handful of curious onlookers lingered on street corners, as if expecting trouble. Dwayne guessed they feared a sudden roar of motorcycle engines announcing the gang's wrath. He paused at an alley's mouth, scanning for anything suspicious, but only encountered empty trash bins and drifting dust motes. 2 hours later, he found himself walking toward Raven's Hollow again, compelled by the sense that something needed finishing. The local hardware store had provided him with a length of rope and a sturdy baton, items he picked up in case the Crimson Fangs returned. He wasn't seeking to start violence, but he wasn't naive about their vow of revenge either. The bar looked battered in daylight. A chunk of the neon sign had burned out, leaving only half the letters illuminated. A few broken chairs sat stacked outside, evidence of the brawl. Linda stood in the entryway, arms folded, her expression tight with concern. She glanced around anxiously, as though bracing for an army of bikers to thunder onto the lot any moment. Dwayne offered her a nod. "I thought I'd drop by," he said simply. Linda exhaled, tension loosening slightly at his presence. "I appreciate it," she replied, forcing a small smile. "Everyone's jumpy after last night. A few local farmers came by, offered to keep watch, but they have their own work." She shrugged. "Seems you're the only one who can keep them at bay if they come." Her admission carried a weight of uneasy gratitude, and Dwayne didn't relish the role of lone guardian. Still, he couldn't walk away. He'd learned that once you step into a fight against bullies, you either see it through or risk them punishing innocent bystanders. "I won't let them bulldoze this place," he promised, voice calm, but Linda spotted determination beneath it. As if on cue, the distant sputter of motorcycle engines rumbled. Dwayne stiffened, scanning the horizon, but the noise faded, possibly just a couple of townsfolk on bikes or travelers passing through. Linda released a breath she'd been holding. "This is no way to live," she muttered. "We always tried to keep our heads down. Let the Fangs do their thing. But it's gotten worse over the past months. They demand protection fees. Threaten me. Last night was bound to happen eventually." Dwayne nodded. Bullies don't stop unless confronted. A memory flickered in his mind, of times he'd dealt with intimidation in the wrestling ring, in film sets, or on the streets. In every scenario, standing one's ground was the only real remedy. Glancing toward the bar's dim interior, Linda's voice softened. "Folks in town are fed up, but they also fear the Fangs. If they see a chance, they might stand up too. But we need more than just one man, no matter how strong." She raised a brow, eyes flicking over Dwayne's imposing form. He sighed, crossing his arms. "Then let's give them that chance." The words startled Linda, who half expected him to play the lone hero. "You're planning on riling up the entire town against them?" she asked uncertainly. Dwayne considered it, weighing how a community might unify. "Might not take much riling, if they're as tired of the gang as you say." Linda stood in pensive silence. The notion of openly challenging the Crimson Fangs was risky. They were numerous, armed, and known for crossing lines without remorse. But at the same time, perhaps a spark of defiance was all the town needed to reclaim their dignity. Later that afternoon, Linda discreetly reached out to a handful of townsfolk, quietly spreading the word that Dwayne Johnson intended to hold a meeting at Raven's Hollow after closing hours. It was an unlikely venue for a community gathering, but Linda reasoned that confronting the problem at its source was symbolic. If they were to stand against the Crimson Fangs, they needed to reclaim the very ground the bikers had used as a stronghold. As dust settled, a small trickle of residents began arriving. A few farmers, the local mechanic, 2 truck drivers, and a couple of orchard workers. Their expressions mingled curiosity with fear. Some had bruises from past run-ins with the bikers, while others had quietly paid fees for months to avoid trouble. They found seats amid the battered tables, eyeing each other nervously. Dwayne stood near the bar, arms folded, his stance exuding a calm confidence. Linda hovered close, shotgun hidden behind the counter. No one doubted a violent interruption could happen any second. "Thank you for coming," Dwayne said, voice low but resonant. He surveyed their worried faces. "I know you're scared, but I also know you're tired of living under threats." A man in a plaid shirt, his knuckles scarred from old fights, raised a trembling hand. "We appreciate what you did," he muttered. "But the Crimson Fangs, they don't forgive. My cousin tried to stand up once, and they destroyed his livestock, threatened his wife. We can't all fight them the way you can." Another older woman wearing an apron dusted with flour sighed. They roll through the diner, throw their weight around, and we just keep our heads down. We're not fighters, but if we do nothing, they'll keep pushing. She cast a grateful glance at Linda, acknowledging the bartender's bravery in brandishing a gun last night. Dwayne nodded, letting a short silence pass as he gauged their mindsets. You can't rely on me alone, he began, looking each person in the eye. But I can teach you a few things. Sometimes it's not about skill or muscle. It's about unity. If the entire town stands up, the bikers can't single you out. They feed off fear. The crowd exchanged uneasy murmurs. One of the orchard workers, tall and wiry, cleared his throat. What if we form a watch, like patrols? He looked to Dwayne, searching for approval. But do we have enough men? Enough guns? Linda's jaw tightened. We may not have an armory, but we have shotguns, hunting rifles, a few sidearms. My father's old trunk has a stack of ammo for the bar's shotgun. We're not helpless. She flicked a glance at Dwayne, who nodded. If the entire town organizes, you can watch each other's backs. Signal if the Crimson Fangs show up. Another man, a scruffy driver with a baseball cap, piped up. But what if the bikers come in huge numbers? They've got alliances in the next county. Heard rumors they can rally over 20 men easily. Fear tinted his voice, and a hush gripped the group. Dwayne exhaled calmly. Even an army can't hold a place where everyone stands together, he said, his tone resolute. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but the alternative is living in constant terror. He allowed a beat of silence. And maybe the Fangs will realize you're no longer easy targets. Slowly, heads began to nod. The orchard worker, emboldened, suggested meeting again tomorrow to plan a watch schedule. The diner owner said she'd spread the word among her customers. Linda offered Ravens Hollow as a central location for organizing, ironically transforming it from a place of past intimidation into a command center for defiance. A fragile sense of hope emerged, flickering in their eyes. They dispersed after an hour, still apprehensive but with newfound determination. As the last townsfolk left, Linda locked the bar doors. Dwayne lingered in the gloom, arms resting on a table that still bore deep gouges from the fight. You think this'll really work? Linda asked, voice hushed. Outside, the wind rustled. The sense of calm felt tenuous, like calm before a storm. We'll see, Dwayne replied, but it's better than doing nothing. He stared at the battered walls, recalling how easily he'd beaten the bikers. The real question remained, how fierce would the Crimson Fangs' revenge be, and could the town muster enough courage to stand firm? The following 2 days saw Ravens Hollow transformed into an impromptu nerve center for the town's nascent resistance. Word spread quickly among neighbors, bartenders, clerks, and farmhands. Some were hesitant, certain the Crimson Fangs would retaliate with unstoppable fury. Others, emboldened by Dwayne Johnson's presence, mustered newly found courage. Even individuals who had long tolerated intimidation realized that a stand, if unified, might succeed. In the evenings, Dwayne offered basic guidance on defensive tactics. A half-dozen men and women, ranging from the orchard worker to the diner owner, listened attentively in the bar's main area. While Dwayne didn't have time to turn them into martial arts experts, he showed them how to hold a stance, how to react if pinned or threatened, and how to avoid blind aggression. Linda served coffee instead of beer, fueling long nights of strategy discussion. Amid these training sessions, a quiet sense of community flourished. The orchard worker, named Raoul, discovered common ground with the mustached driver, Jim, both of whom had teenage children they wanted to protect from the gang's reach. A retired teacher, Lucille, offered to keep watch with a hunting rifle if push came to shove. Each new volunteer brought a fresh slice of skill or resources. Some had walkie-talkies or trail cameras left over from hunting trips. Others contributed firewood or food to ensure the bar remained a functional base camp if a prolonged standoff occurred. Dwayne, who had begun these preparations almost stoically, gradually let himself connect with the townsfolk. He heard their stories of harassment, like the orchard worker who had to pay insurance fees to keep his orchard from being vandalized, or Linda's repeated threats from the Crimson Fangs demanding a cut of her bar's earnings. The tales were bitter yet unifying. Each recounted injustice lit the collective will to stand up. One late afternoon, the group hammered out a rough patrol schedule. 3 pairs armed with hunting rifles or shotguns would rotate along the roads leading into town. Another pair would remain near Raven's Hollow. Meanwhile, Linda kept the phone lines open, while Dwayne scouted vantage points along the ridges outside town. They lacked formal training, but resourcefulness spurred them on. High above the roads, Dwayne found an abandoned water tower, its rusted skeleton looming over the brush. From there, he could survey the main route that the bikers would likely take. The vantage provided an early warning system if a large wave of motorcycles advanced. Lucille, the retired teacher turned sharpshooter, volunteered to join him up there once or twice for extended watch shifts. With binoculars, a walkie-talkie, and a thermos of coffee, they formed an unlikely sentinel pair. Still, each hour felt like borrowed time. Everyone suspected that Clayton Briggs and the Crimson Fangs were regrouping. The tension weighed heavily. Days passed with no sign of the gang, fueling a paradoxical mix of hope and dread. Hope that maybe the bikers had retreated to terrorize some other region, and dread that they were quietly assembling a force large enough to crush the town in one merciless sweep. In the bar's hush, Linda would sometimes wipe a cloth over the same spot for minutes on end, lost in thought. "Maybe we rattled them enough they won't come back," she ventured, but her tone was uncertain. Dwayne studied her worried face and responded calmly, "Don't bet on that. People like them don't let go of grudges. They'll want to make an example." Night after night, Dwayne Johnson took watch, either perched atop the water tower or patrolling the deserted streets. Shadows flickered under sparse streetlights, and each echo of a motorcycle in the distance made hearts race. The volunteers sometimes looked to Dwayne for reassurance. He'd offer a short nod or a clipped phrase, "We stand together," or "They have to fight every one of us." Even those few words eased their anxiety. Behind closed doors, some families prepared to barricade themselves if a full-blown invasion occurred. Others readied vehicles for a quick escape. Tension slithered through the otherwise calm daily rhythms, people continuing to farm, stock shelves, or mow lawns, like a serpent coiled just below the surface. Dwayne recognized that communal spirit was strong, but the question still loomed. Was it strong enough to fend off a well-armed gang with a thirst for vengeance? Tension finally snapped one evening under a blood-red sunset. From Dwayne's vantage high atop the water tower, he saw the first glimmer of headlights snaking along the winding highway. The deep-throated rumble of dozens of motorcycle engines reverberated across the hills, a dark promise riding on the dusk. Through binoculars, he counted at least 15 bikes. Likely more followed behind. He recognized the lead rider immediately, the looming silhouette of Clayton Briggs, that trademark posture stiff with fury. Dwayne's heart pounded. Carefully, he radioed Linda back at Raven's Hollow. "They're coming in force. Spread the word." Linda responded, her voice shaky but resolute. "Understood." Within minutes, a cluster of volunteers assembled at the bar, weapons ready, hearts pounding. Meanwhile, around the edges of town, watch pairs prepared to create blockades or distractions if needed. Fear tingled in every nerve, but the townsfolk gritted their teeth, determined not to cower behind locked doors this time. 20 minutes later, as the final band of twilight receded, the Crimson Fangs roared into town. At least 24 bikers, some carrying shotguns, others brandishing chains or baseball bats, thundered down the main street. The locals, peering from windows or behind barricades, felt their breath catch. The gang had indeed mustered a small army, and at their front rode Clayton, battered face set in grim lines of vengeance. Parking in a loose formation outside Raven's Hollow, the bikers revved engines, saturating the night with a mechanical roar. Dust and gravel swirled from the tires, creating a choking haze. For a charged moment, no one spoke, tension coalescing into a near-tangible presence. Then Clayton swung off his motorcycle, stepping forward with a swagger that belied the bruises Dwayne had given him. "Come out, big man!" Clayton shouted, voice raw. "Thought you were unstoppable. Let's see you handle all of us." The challenge boomed into the quiet. A flicker of movement behind the bar's doors told him his invitation had not fallen on deaf ears. Despite that, he barked an order to his men. "Spread out. Don't let him slip away." The crimson fangs fanned out, forming an encircling threat. Within Raven's Hollow, Linda wiped sweat from her brow, nodding at a cluster of townsfolk huddled behind the tables. "Stick to the plan," she whispered. They each nodded, knuckles white on shotguns or rifles. Dwayne, standing near the door, cracked his neck. He exchanged a grim look with Linda. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She bit her lip, then gave a short nod. Dwayne stepped out onto the porch. Immediately, the gang's attention laser-focused on him. Silence took hold, broken only by the distant hum of idling engines. "You sure you want this?" he called, voice carrying an edge of caution. "I gave you a chance to walk away." A bark of harsh laughter erupted from one of the bikers. Travis, his face sporting a fresh scar. "Last time was a fluke," he spat. "Now you're outnumbered, friend." His words oozed contempt. Clayton's hand rose and Travis fell silent. The leader strode forward, stopping a short distance from Dwayne. His men spread in a half-circle behind him, forming a ring of inevitability. "Got the entire county's worth of fangs behind me," Clayton said, voice crackling with dark satisfaction. "You talk big, but I'm taking you down. And this bar along with you to remind these folks who's boss." Behind Dwayne, Linda and half a dozen townspeople emerged, brandishing rifles and shotguns. The battered windows of Raven's Hollow also slid open, revealing further locals with hidden firearms braced. A brief flicker of uncertainty passed among the Crimson Fangs as they realized they faced more than just one man. The bar's porch light illuminated a tense standoff. 24 bikers with knives, clubs, and guns, and a cluster of townsfolk with fear in their eyes, but resolve in their hearts. "Wait, you've all got guns?" Travis growled, shifting weight uncomfortably. "Who told you to stand up?" Linda responded from her vantage, voice trembling but resolute. "We told ourselves. Enough is enough." Clayton's upper lip curled, scanning the determined faces. The presence of so many armed citizens gave him pause, but he refused to back down. "You're playing with fire," he warned, jabbing a finger at Linda, then at Dwayne. "We'll burn this place to the ground." Dwayne's answer was a silent step forward, posture unyielding. One hand clenched, the other open, as if offering them a final chance. "Don't," he said, voice subdued. "Nobody needs to die, but if you push, we'll fight." The night thickened around them, tension strung tight as a drawn bow. A fragile hush clutched the center of town. The people of Raven's Hollow, armed with what they had, facing off against the Crimson Fangs, who outnumbered them but had never seen such collective defiance. Clayton Briggs appeared unsettled, scanning the ring of shotguns and rifles. Even from yards away, he recognized the wide, furious eyes of farmers and store clerks who had tasted intimidation for too long, but hatred spurred him on. "Fine," he snarled, lifting his own shotgun. "Let's see how tough you all are." A wave of savage roars rose from the bikers as they revved engines or brandished weapons. The group advanced, bridging the gap. Linda's heart hammered. She forced the barrel of her shotgun forward, arms rigid, while other townsfolk took aim. Stillness reigned for a single heartbeat, like the hush of the sky before lightning. Then it broke. Two of the bikers lunged from the flank, seeking to catch the defenders unprepared. A farmer cried out, firing a warning shot that whizzed over their heads. The bikers dove aside, cursing. "Stand your ground," Linda barked, voice cracking. She worried some might panic, but nobody turned tail. All at once, the confrontation splintered into smaller pockets of combat. Several Crimson Fangs peeled off, circling behind adjacent buildings to flank the townsfolk. Dwayne saw them retreating into the gloom, recognized the tactic, and sprinted after them, fists coiled. He refused to let an ambush unfold unchallenged. Travis, noticing Dwayne's pursuit, laughed darkly and sped off to intercept, brandishing a chain. Behind the bar, two orchard workers pressed their backs against a dumpster, rifles trembling. Another biker approached, aiming a pistol. The orchard workers fired into the air, forcing him to duck. Grappling ensued in the dim alley, shadows thrashing as voices grunted and cursed. Meanwhile, near the bar's porch, Linda knelt behind a barricade of tables with 3 volunteers. Shots rang out sporadically, each one loaded with an uneasy caution. The townsfolk didn't want to kill if they didn't have to, but they'd do it if pushed. Dwayne, stealthy in the swirling darkness, snuck behind the building. He spotted three bikers, Travis included, trying to loop around. With a burst of motion, Dwayne barreled into them. Travis lashed out with his chain, but it raked only the air as Dwayne ducked. Another biker, Mace, attempted to club Dwayne with a crowbar, only to be disarmed by a savage elbow strike to the chest. Travis roared, chain whistling, but Dwayne caught it mid-swing, yanking Travis forward. A punishing knee to Travis's stomach folded him like paper. Simultaneously out front, Linda glimpsed Clayton near the center of the street, leveling his shotgun at a cluster of townsfolk. Heart pounding, she rose to intervene. The muzzle flashed. She heard a cry of pain. Someone had been grazed. Linda fired back, her own shot slamming into Clayton's bike. Sparks flew as metal spat. The gang leader howled in fury, turning to see who dared hamper his prized machine. He locked eyes with Linda, and a malignant grin warped his face. Pumping the shotgun, Clayton advanced with lethal intent. Before he could pull the trigger, the older orchard worker, Raoul, popped up from cover and fired. The shell roared out, catching Clayton's left shoulder in a spray of buckshot. The biker reeled, letting out a savage bellow. For a moment it seemed he might drop, but raw anger fueled him. Through clenched teeth he refused to fall, cursing the orchard worker. Behind the bar, the orchard worker with the rifle stood trembling but resolute. Clayton's glare promised him a slow death if he got the chance. Yet the orchard worker refused to shrink back. Linda, reloading swiftly, recognized that the final stand was upon them. Townsfolk pressed in from multiple angles, a ring of battered determination against the battered bikers, who still possessed an edge in a savage cunning. In the swirling chaos, Dwayne reemerged from the shadows, having subdued Travis and the other two bikers who tried flanking them. He spied Clayton limping, shotgun drooping in his grasp. Freed from immediate threats, Dwayne closed the distance with purposeful steps. He recognized in Clayton's eyes an uncontrollable rage, but also a flicker of fear. The Crimson Fang's leader realized they might not crush this uprising as easily as they believed. As Dwayne loomed, Clayton lifted the shotgun in a last defiant gesture, ignoring the blood pooling at his shoulder. "You're done," the biker hissed, voice ragged. But Dwayne lunged, a blur of muscle, knocking the barrel skyward. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the night. With his other hand, Dwayne delivered a brutal hook to Clayton's jaw, sending him crashing onto the asphalt. In a heartbeat, the final vestiges of the Crimson Fang's resistance collapsed. Their leader, Clayton Briggs, sprawled on the pavement, face contorted in agony, shotgun clattering from his grip. The surrounding bikers, battered by the town's sudden unity and Dwayne Johnson's unstoppable might, realized the fight had turned. Many lay groaning near alley walls or behind scattered crates, the rest staring in hollow-eyed disbelief at the once unbreakable Clayton, now gasping for air. A collective hush gripped the street. Linda, orchard workers, and other volunteers stood at vantage points, weapons still readied, scanning for any sign of last-ditch aggression. The faint sizzle of a shorted street lamp, the distant bark of a dog, these mundane sounds slipped into the silence. One by one, the Crimson Fangs that could still move dropped their arms, raising hands in either surrender or shock. Dwayne hovered above Clayton, chest heaving but gaze unwavering. He seized the battered biker leader by his vest, hauling him halfway upright. The man's eyes flitted with hate but also a creeping terror. "You threatened these people," Dwayne rumbled, voice low. "You tried to break them. Instead, you found out they're stronger than you." A cough racked Clayton, and he spat blood onto the asphalt, struggling to find words. The sting of betrayal and defeat roiled inside him. We'll be back," he rasped, still clinging to that last shred of intimidation. But the weight behind it had vanished. The onlookers from the bar recognized that. "You won't," Linda stated firmly. She lowered her shotgun, stepping closer. Her face, once etched with anxiety, now reflected steadfast resolve. "Because if you do, you'll face all of us again, and we're not backing down." A chorus of tired but determined nods affirmed her statement. Travis lay sprawled near a dented trash can, eyes rolling, unable to stand. Mason Bruno, likewise, had lost all willingness to resume the fight. A few more of the Crimson Fangs had scurried to retrieve their bikes once they realized the tide had turned, but they found the townsfolk forming an impenetrable perimeter. Some of the braver orchard workers methodically placed old hunting rifles at strategic angles, glaring in daring silence at the would-be escapees. Dwayne let Clayton drop to the ground, where he groaned, cradling his shot shoulder. Striding a short distance away, Dwayne scanned the scene, the battered bikes, the shattered illusions of invincibility. It was all scattered across the main street like broken illusions. The hush carried a tense finality. For so long, the Crimson Fangs had harbored unstoppable bravado. Now a single confrontation with a determined man in a unified town had shattered that myth. One orchard worker, limping from a minor scuffle, approached Dwayne, extending a trembling hand. "Thank you," he managed, voice tight with raw emotion. "We'd never have stood up like this if you didn't show us how." Dwayne accepted the handshake, his expression tempered with humility. "It's all of you who stood up," he corrected. "I just gave you a push." He glanced at Linda, who offered a small smile that conveyed volumes of gratitude. Then, turning to the subdued bikers, Dwayne declared, "Now gather your wounded, gather your pride, and get the hell out." An orchard worker shoved a battered bike upright. Another townsman took up a stance with a shotgun, ensuring no sudden moves were made. Clutching battered limbs, the Crimson Fangs that could still hobble or limp began to help their fellows. Some carried Travis or Mace's barely conscious forms. The rest half-pushed or kicked bikes to the edge of the blockade. Clayton, hissing with every breath, was dragged to his prized motorcycle by two groaning allies. His glare flicked from the orchard worker to Linda, then to Dwayne, ending in a silent vow of hatred. But fear outweighed his fury. He knew continuing the fight meant total annihilation. The rumble of battered engines rose as the bikers fled. They left in ones or twos, some spitting curses behind them. Others wore blank expressions, as if unable to comprehend how a ragtag group of townsfolk and one unstoppable man had crushed them. The thunder of retreating motorcycles faded into the night, each echo receding until only an exhausted hush remained. Standing in the aftermath, Linda let the shotgun slip from her hands. A wave of relief threatened to buckle her knees. Dwayne stepped up, offering a steadying arm. She exhaled a shaky laugh, tears glimmering. "We did it," she whispered, voice hushed in wonder. The orchard workers, battered but exultant, formed a circle around them, relief fueling quick embraces and emotional murmurs. Dwayne gazed across their weary faces, all exhausted from the prolonged standoff. "They might try again," he warned gently, but Linda and the others, hearts buoyed by victory, nodded with new courage. They had discovered a secret that overcame fear: unity. And they had an ally in a man who refused to let bullies reign. That night, Ravens Hollow glowed with quiet celebration. Families emerged from locked doors, embraced neighbors, and exchanged stories of the tense showdown. Linda reopened the bar not for business, but for communal healing, a place to gather and marvel at how, in a single evening, they had reclaimed their dignity. Dwayne accepted a beer, raising it in a silent toast to these determined people.